Julian Vayne is a British independent scholar and author with over 4 decades of experience within esoteric culture, from druidry to chaos magic, from indigenous shamanism through to Freemasonry and witchcraft. Growing up in the Britain of punk and then rave culture, Julian immersed himself in the philosophy and techniques of magic. His journey into group ritual practice began within the Western esoteric tradition when he was 16. Since then, he has worked in ceremony with practitioners from many different lands and lineages. Julian is a senior member of the Magical Pact of the Illuminates of Thanateros and is widely recognised as one of Britain's leading occultists. In the 1990s, Julian edited Britain's best-selling pagan newspaper, Pagan Voice, and in 2001 published one of the first books of the modern psychedelic renaissance, Drugs and the Imagination. In addition to exploring traditional sacred medicines, Julian's work includes the first published accounts of the entheogenic ritual use of ketamine and several novel psychedelic sacraments. It's really long.
I know. I just.
You can read it. You can read it in the website. The rest of it. No. Let's skip forward here. Julian is a co-organizer of the psychedelic conference Breaking Convention and a trustee of the Psychedelic Museum Project, a founding member of the post-prohibition think tank Transform. He sits on the academic board of the Journal of Psychedelic Studies and has been a visiting lecturer at several British universities. He is an advocate of post-prohibition culture and supporter of psychedelic prisoners through the Scales Project. Okay, the last little bit, which is relevant, so I will read it out. Julian facilitates psychedelic ceremony as well as providing one-to-one psychedelic integration sessions and support. He is the author of the celebrated Getting Higher, the Manual of Psychedelic Ceremony. Since 2011, he has been sharing his work through the blog of Baphomet. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nikki. It's most appreciated. Thank you, everyone, for coming along to this talk. So, psychedelic ceremony and my magical things. Well, for the last 3 years, I've been running one of those little side projects, those things that happened in lockdown that then kind of, people carried on doing. And I certainly did one of these. So on YouTube, you'll find this project called My Magical Thing. So this is where esoteric and psychedelic practitioners get to share a magical thing. Clues in the name. So this is my turn. I'd like to do a little show and tell, and I'd like to introduce you to some of the things that I use in my own work holding psychedelic space as a sitter for others, particularly when I'm doing that work with sacred mushrooms. And I'd like to share the literal purpose and also some of the symbolic meanings of these objects with you. So, as is traditional, for a shaman from Stevenage, I have them in a Sainsbury's bag. I'm strong and sturdy. Sometimes when I do home visits, this is one of the things I bring into the house, yeah? And there's reasons for that. So, first magical thing. So this is my singing bowl. The singing bowl allows me to create a punctuation mark in the ceremony. So a punctuation mark might happen as the process in the sit shifts a gear. And I use perhaps the singing bowl maybe sometimes to kind of gently acknowledge that transition. And so, incidentally, a top tip here is that people's experience of, say, psilocybin medicine, many other substances as well, but talking here specifically about psilocybin, it often shifts a gear when they go and visit the bathroom. So they go and have a wee, they come back, and a new element of the process unfolds, mostly because they're not thinking, do I need a wee? I'm not sure. So I use the bowl to mark the beginning and the end of the ceremony. And sometimes I use it in the gaps between tracks on a playlist. So even though the person may conceivably be wearing headphones, there's enough of a sound there for the person to be kind of gently aware, the person I'm sitting for, that my role, which is ground control, is I'm present, I'm available, and I'm an active companion in that journey. Ah, there's the sound of the bowl, Julian's there, it's all good. So the bowl reminds me about this idea of less being more. Sure, there are, of course, fantastic ceremonies where ecstatic drumming and dancing is the order of the day. But in this style of work that I'm talking about, where we invite the client to travel inwards, anything that we, their companion, do should aspire to be subtle and easy and accessible. And I say accessible because whilst the singing bowl is well known in Eastern cultures, it is simply a bell and with a melodious tone. There's no need to know anything about Buddha. There he is at the bottom, rich guy with an eating disorder. But also with some really nice insights, it has to be said. There's no need to know anything about the Buddha to go, oh, that's a really nice sound. Yeah, so it's accessible. The emptiness of the bowl is what allows it to do its work, to resonate, to vibrate, to sing. And likewise, for me, the psychedelic session should tend towards emptiness. Now, what I mean by that is that our role as companions, as sitters, is not to lay our trip on anyone here. Successfully supporting a session isn't about our pet theories of how psychedelics work. So our role is to create this space for others. Successfully supporting a session isn't about our pet theory, whether it's transpersonal, integrative, ancient, modern, or whatever. We're like the metal of the bowl. We aspire to resonate with whatever happens in that journey, whether that's gentle or frustrating, or one that strikes a powerful chord in us, or whether choppy waves of the session might be challenging to navigate. But we, the sitter, are not the center of attention here. We are a caretaker, a curator. Our job is to hold the space, just like the bowl does. Now, we may be a therapist, perhaps, and if we are, we should be mindful of the root of that word as an attendant to the healing process. Yeah? We are not the healer. We are those who aspire to maintain the container so that the healer, who is the client or the traveler, the person who's taken the psychedelic dose, the largest psychedelic dose, they can go through their process in the best way that we can manage, the best way possible. Incidentally, I've noticed in some therapeutic styles, such as those influenced by the work of Stan Grof or Otto Rank, that there's a fashion, particularly at the moment, for talking about the root of people's problems in terms of a traumatic birth experience for them, so an experience of their actual birth. Now, in my view, this way of describing things can be unhelpful, evidentially unsupportable, and sometimes a damaging example of laying your trip on someone else. So rather than looking for the skills of how to do psychedelic sitting with psilocybin, in the world of talk-based therapy, which is a valuable and important place with lots of very, very interesting ideas, if you want to know how to do psychedelic sitting, where you need to look, in my view, is in nursing and in midwifery. Those are the people who are used to not laying their trip on others, but caring for people as they go through a process. So my bowl can also sing, as well as being struck like a bell. And this reminds me of the mutability of ceremonial things. For while it is indeed the case that using a bell like this is an ancient technology, the idea of the Tibetan singing bowl is likely a recent development, or perhaps a Western culture-focused marketing innovation. And if you don't believe me, Wikipedia is your friend. So this bowl might be something that people consider to be drawn from the cultures of the East, but it doesn't feel uncomfortable to me to be employing that musical instrument, even though it originates in many respects outside of my landscape. For while we shouldn't misrepresent ourselves as being part of lineages and styles that aren't our own, it's okay, indeed it's inevitable, that we should be inspired by other people and other communities. We ceremonialists of all types, we riff off each other's practice. We adopt and shed symbols as a snake sheds its skin. And as any ethnographer of ritual will confirm, ritual changes. Even though it might claim to be the tradition morphs and changes. New innovations happen. Cross-fertilizations, like the idea of the singing bowl, happen all the time. Good example of this is the practice of yoga as a physical exercise, the kind of yoga that we do on the mats that we find here in Breaking Convention. Most of that is a 20th century innovation. It doesn't mean it's no good. It just means that it's an innovation. It's an evolving practice. And these developments, these changes, these transformations, they give rise to whole new traditions, which grow like varieties of plant grafted onto this ancient rootstock, and in my view should be celebrated in that way. So, what else have we got in here? Oh yes, this. So this feather is a gift from a friend, from a condor that they rescued in Chile. I use it as a fan that sometimes helps out in ceremony. The feather allows me to gently waft air over the person I'm sitting for. And this is a way of touching without touching that I first saw in Native American church peyote circles. The movement of the air can help the client have a sense that something is passing through them or away from them. And I'm, of course, careful when I use it, since, like the bowl teaches, less is often more. So I explain before the session to the person that I might use the feather and let them know how it feels. I let them touch it, fan me. How does it work? Perhaps I use it often as maybe as a part of a smudging ceremony, simple smudging ceremony as we begin the journey. Sometimes people will actively call for the feather and perhaps the ritual smoke. And I often use Palo Santo wood simply because I've got a big bunch of it given to me by the same friend who gave me the feather. For other people, such shamanic shenanigans would be inappropriate, so the feather simply stays on the altar. The gentleness of the feather reminds me again of the delicacy of ceremonial space and more generally of working with psychedelics. If I use the feather, I must aspire to be intuitively sure it's right to do so, and this only comes with practice. As we practice sitting, we learn how to feel into the ceremony and invite the arising of the right words, the right gestures and processes to come through us as we support the person making their journey. This comes with time and experience, and there'll be inevitably occasions where we do things that on reflection we could do better next time. And in order to cultivate the skills necessary to do that, to be a good sitter, we have to do our own practice. We have to do things like deep listening and introspection, feeling not just how we think things are going with our heads, but with the whole of our bodies. So we are informed as much as possible by the information we pick up in the session and less absorbed by our own stuff. And for me, this includes the practice of taking the mushroom medicine on a regular basis, which is especially important if we are doing lots of sitting work. So the feather reminds me of the ancient Egyptian goddess Maat, goddess of truth and justice, from whom we get our word mathematics, who's often represented as a woman crowned with a feather. The feather reminds me to be honest about the process of working with mushrooms, what we can expect from the medicine, and what happens, and how it can be quite diverse. This is not the same as buying an airline ticket, because where we travel to in our journey can be very different. So helping to gently manage those expectations while still acknowledging the power of psychedelics is a delicate balance. Like the measuring scales that are sacred to this ancient goddess, we weigh the costs and the benefits of our intervention. And like the waft of the feather and the measuring of the dose, we try to be gentle and do no harm and strive for balance. The feather reminds me as an emblem of truth and justice, about the limits of our scientific understanding of substances such as psilocybin. Yes, there's lots of nice, shiny research emerging. And there's also, of course, the older research that we can access, and that's to be celebrated. But let's be mindful of the limits of our knowledge. Many contemporary studies, for example, involve incredibly small sample sizes. So we might summarize the research by saying, oh, psilocybin promotes an awareness that lack of nature connection is an important part in many people's experience of depression. But that statement is based on a very, very limited study. And sure, it points towards something that many of us kind of intuitively think is probably the case. But when it comes to making claims about these medicines, it's not uncommon in the emerging psychedelic community to see how fashions for science, pseudoscience, proliferate. Take, for example, the story of microdosing, which is kind of the wild west of psychedelia, with claims, many exaggerated or at least highly selective. So like the feather, I try and be gentle in what I tell people that I'm going to sit for. And I basically say there are two things I can pretty much guarantee and nothing beyond that. The first is that you will have an opportunity to understand your world, your life, your experience from a new point of view. And the second is that after the experience, it is likely that you will feel that you somehow have more capacity to deal with whatever comes next, the defragmentation of the psychic hard drive. So, the feather. Ah, yes. So, this is Seb. Seb, as you can see, is a crocodile. Seb is short for Sebek, who is the crocodile deity of ancient Egypt. By all means, consult Wikipedia if you want to know more about his venerable pedigree. So Seb is a physical representation of what we might describe in a straightforward way as our lizard brain. And we can imagine that as the systems in the body-mind that allow us to make split-second decisions, to play dead, to fight, to flee. And I introduce Seb to people and suggest that they try cradling Seb in their arms. And I explain how when our lizard brain is stimulated, we can feel fearful. And certainly the stimulation of the serotonin 2A receptor site, which is activated by psilocybin, can lead to those sensations. I explain that by holding Seb, we can, if we like, get a nice hit of oxytocin, and that can help us, encourage us as we let go into the experience. This girl, try. It's nice. Feels nice. Oh, very good. Very nice. Thank you. See? Happier already. So over the years, Seb has set for the duration of people's journeys on their chests. I've seen him being stroked with his paws and his head. I've seen him raised up to people's third eyes for improbably long periods of time in what I suppose was a very deeply meaningful part of the trip. Now, the thing is, Seb as a cuddly toy reminds me of the ease and the lightheartedness that I feel it can be helpful to engage with as we approach the psychedelic experience. Because for all the earnest, brow-furrowing talk about appropriate preparation, trauma release, and the work of integration, it's important to remember that the psychedelic experience can be funny, and joyous, and fascinating, and pleasurable. Remember, kids, most people take mushrooms for fun. And while there may be particular benefits of using psilocybin in that kind of inward setting, let's not forget that fun, recreation itself can be a great healer, help us be whole. So what we're doing in psychedelic ceremony is powerful stuff, but it's also everyday experience. And normalizing it. Hey, we're just taking mushrooms. It's okay. That's important, especially in our culture, where despite the openness and acceptance in conferences and spaces like this, we must not forget, and this includes any of you smoking weed behind the bike sheds, that the shadow of the war on drugs still looms large. And so that gentleness, that ease, it really matters. The playful aspect of Seb, I mean, dude's got nostrils shaped like love hearts, yeah? So it's helpful to remember this playful aspect of the psychedelic experience. And finding ways to play, in my view, is essential about the reconnection of and learning to engage with that fundamental learning strategy. Play is one of our fundamental ways that we learn as people. So one aspect of this is that when I invite people to prepare for and to follow up a psychedelic experience, I often say, spend some time playing. So that might be with paint, with clay, not necessarily trying to make a finished art product. It might be just having a stick in the sand or the mud. You know, these things are really, really valuable. And in my view, this is particularly interesting in relation to what happens in kind of Euro-American contexts where we privilege producing and talking and consuming and achieving, allowing ourselves some playful time, time to loaf about, time to gently let things settle in, is very valuable. And of course, fun. Embracing our crocodile reminds me that pain itself, discomfort, worry, fear, maybe the things that we have during the session that we're bringing in to try and help the session is aspiring to help us with, that those things are not the enemy. We feel pain because something needs attention, and conscious awareness notices this. Yeah? You don't notice your left foot unless something's wrong with it. How's your left foot? All right? Yeah, see? Now, the pain hopefully means that we can act to do something to help reduce our dis-ease, our suffering. But without the pain, we don't know that something is wrong. And sometimes the mushroom can help us kind of zero in on our pain. And also, as we go into that wider lantern-style awareness that we get from the psychedelic experience, we see that pain from a new perspective, and we can discover new ways to make sense of it. And that sometimes can reduce it very substantially. What else have we got in here? Oh, yes. Very good. Well, so this is my magician's hat. It's also my hat as Priest of Chaos, which is a title bestowed by people in my community of practice, my magical community. It's bestowed on people who are recognized for their role in serving the community. The hat, like the feather, was a gift. It was originally given to me by a druid friend who'd added the roadkill foxtail. And very occasionally I'll wear the hat at, like, you know, bigger rituals, larger communal ceremonies, but it's not something that I would wear during a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 psilocybin sitting session. I mean, unless you want that, you know, which is, you know, that would be cool. But the hat is in the space very often because it reminds me of many things. It reminds me about how we find ourselves doing this work. It's not uncommon for people to come out of their first psilocybin experience with a desire to share it with others. And that excitement, the sense of possibility that psychedelics generate, is quite natural. We'd like our loved ones, people we care about, to share this. And sometimes that desire is interpreted as being called to serve the mushroom and give it to others. Now, that's very well. That's great. It might be just the right motivation to be a sitter or a therapist or a researcher. However, for me, the acid test, if you pardon the pun, are we ready to do this work, isn't what we think ourselves we would like to do, it's what other people think of us. When people start looking for our assistance as a sitter, especially when this repeatedly happens, perhaps we are being asked to do this work. That's when we're being called to serve the medicine. The hat is suitably crazy, with feathers from a couple of feathers and a couple of badges given to me by LSD historian Andy Roberts. And these quirky additions remind me not to take myself too seriously. I sometimes jokingly say that the definition of a shaman is the person in the crazy hat with the drugs. And the thing is, this irreverence isn't meant to be unkind. It's about pricking the sometimes overblown pomposity of our own hype and the Western colonialist fetishization around our notions of shamanism. Our ability to laugh at ourselves is part of an essential process. It's about cultivating the virtue of humility, a healthy sense of humour, admitting to the limits of our own knowledge, staying curious and cognizant of the world as a great mystery. My role isn't to wear a fancy hat and bang a drum. It's to quietly check the playlist that's running, to offer a blanket and a few words of encouragement if needed, to provide water if requested, to serve food when the journey comes to its end. I'm ground control, and that's a vital role, but I don't need to be dressed like an airline captain to do it. Indeed, my deference to the importance of the person who's doing the healing is shown in a variety of ways. If they lie on a couch, I generally sit lower than they are. I want that empowerment, security to be underscored by the physical relationship. The hat's got the wing of a magpie because in my tradition, my practice is one that I had to seek the gold in the detritus of my culture. My society's tradition of using psychedelics was fractured when the doors of the Temple of Eleusis closed in the 4th century. In recognition of this priceless gift and remembering the tradition, I always play a track by Maria Sabina at the start of my playlist. And of course, metaphorically, many of us wear different hats. And that's one of the most important things about the psychedelic experience. We want to be fully human. To participate in the experience of our lives, we don't want to be just stuck wearing one hat. Sometimes we wear the veil of mourning, sometimes a paper party hat, sometimes a wild festival hat, sometimes nothing at all. Psychedelics may alleviate our depression, but not by making us endlessly happy. We want to broaden the repertoire of mental states beyond our fixation on a substance or traumatic memory to get a wider view of ourselves and to try new hats on. So these are a few of my allies, my tools and my friends. They're not what I expected I would present as the essential components of psychedelic ceremony when I first started out. Good practice is like that, at least for me. It self-assembles as a bricolage of what feels right. So I've learned through this work that good sitting requires essentially what we might describe as 3 simple things. It requires knowledge, an understanding of the drugs we're going to be using, the substances we're going to be using. It requires kindness, where we seek to support a person but not impose our views on them or infantilize them. And it comes with experience, time spent doing the work of sitting and by engaging with psychedelics in other settings, such as the religious and the recreational. And experience should include our own ongoing use and connection with these substances. And in that, the recognition that there is always more to learn. This, in my view, at least at the moment, is how we turn mere pharmacology into good psychedelic medicine. Thank you.